call this Germantown School District Teaching and Learning Committee meeting to order at 4:59 p.m. Item 2, roll call. Tracy Pollock.
Here.
Kim Hagemuth.
Here.
Russ Ewert, myself, here. Item 3, agenda revisions and approval.
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Siegenbatham with the motion, Mr. Pollock with the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes. Item 4, approval of minutes, November 6, 2023 committee meeting minutes.
Move to approve the November 6, 2023 committee meeting minutes.
I'll second.
Mr. Pollock with the motion, Ms. Higginbotham with the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Item 5, reports and updates. Mr. Miziak, reading pilot update. Should be 5A we're on. Update number 4.
All right, so we're getting pretty close. And this was supposed to be the month in which we would make some final decisions regarding the reading pilot, but the state of Wisconsin threw us a few curveballs. So as you know, we still have 3 pilots that are going at the elementary school. I think one of the benefits of having the extended pilot, one of the things that has happened is teachers have gained more familiarity with the resource, and internally there have been some opinions and some conceptions about the program that have changed over time, and they've been positive changes. So some of the early struggles that have sometimes led to teachers not feeling 100% confident with a particular resource. Part of that was just the implementation piece of starting something new and using it and being exposed to that different resource. But the meetings that principals have had with teachers regarding the pilots that are being used in their classrooms have been very positive. So all 3 right now I think are in a really good state of utilization within our buildings. So the other piece of that is Kennedy Middle School has also started piloting their resources. So we have HMH going on in 6th grade. Study Sync from McGraw-Hill is in 7th grade, and then in 8th grade they were piloting both. So they started with HMH's product, which is called Into Literature, and then they're transitioning to Study Sync. One of the challenges that we have at the middle school is their literacy classes also do writing. So they're taking a brief pause from the reading pilot to go in to do Lucy Calkins' writer's workshop, and then they'll come back to do Study Sync. I met with all the pilot teachers during the professional development day to collect feedback from them. And again, there's a lot of positive feedback regarding the resources that are being used. They're also posing some questions around some of the tech pieces of those and some of the struggles that kids had using the resources in that way. So not the physical pieces, but the tech side. And we're reaching out to the pilot companies to get their responses on how we can use that more effectively in those classes. But again, I think the vast majority of the feedback that we're receiving from teachers right now has been very positive about both of the programs. One of the other pieces that we're looking at is in one particular grade level, 8th grade, the teachers felt like it may have been just the unit that the students were exposed to, so it was a nonfiction unit. So they thought the level of engagement may be different if they moved them into a fiction unit. So there is a small alteration that we're doing to the middle school plan where they're going to pilot 2 units from each one of them to make sure that they have a healthy balance of what the resource looks like, to give us a full picture of each one of those resources. Unlike the elementary pilot where teachers are only using one resource throughout the entire time, at the middle school in both 7th and 8th grade we're doing a stacked model where they're using Study Sync and HMH so that they can get a picture of both of those resources.
Any questions? Do we have an idea when the state is going to be
So the
ready
last
to honor us with their thoughts?
Yes. So the decision by the state really impacts K2. So that's the piece that we're waiting on. And I think that then cascades all the way up because I do think that may have an impact on where 3-5 would like to go. It would, I think most of our teachers aren't looking at doing HMH into reading in K2 and then switching to Wonders 3.5 and then switching to something else in the middle school. I think once we know what K2 will look like, that will help us make a decision across the board. The committee that is meeting, the Early Literacy Curriculum Council, they had a discussion about how fast that they could do this, and there were legislators from the state who joined that meeting, and the legislators didn't necessarily say, yes, you can change the date. They said that they would support them in doing the work, and they wanted them to do the right work. And from that, the council decided that they were going to extend the date, and the date that they had mentioned in their last meeting was January 30th. So all curriculum companies have to provide documentation on a rubric that the committee is using or the council is using, and that has to be in by January 15th. Our companies have submitted the information to that, so they are being considered by the council to be moved forward with. So we will know by the end of January where they're going, and that'll be helpful information for us. That doesn't really slow down us in terms of collecting data. I think we'll be able to prioritize the resources based on the information that we have, and then once the state information comes in, that'll just be the next gateway that will pass through. So the big piece that I'm sharing with you tonight is the reading pilot rubric. I won't go through every line of this, but I'd like to explain to you how they're going to use it, because at the elementary level, like I said, teachers aren't seeing, they're not actually using both resources in their classroom or all three resources in their classroom. They definitely do have a work. That's okay. I could deal with my echo there. They definitely have a working knowledge of what those resources look like. We've gotten pilot teachers into other classrooms so that they could see the resources in action. Within the same building, there's multiple resources being used, so they're talking to each other, they're comparing the resources on an ongoing basis. But one of the key features that I think is necessary for us to evaluate each one of these programs is to have a tool that all three of the resources will be evaluated on, and our teachers will use that. So that's this rubric that I provided to you. Underneath the reading pilot update, kind of the key points that we've just talked about, I'm reminding you of the priorities of the reading resource. So back in the spring, we had talked about what the teachers really had prioritized and what we're looking for in a resource, and that then translated into pieces of this rubric. So what you'll see in the rubric are kind of some critical areas in which we're asking teachers to take a look at the program and then evaluate it. Underneath each one of the key areas, so for example, we have alignment with prioritized reading learning objectives. Underneath there's some success criteria for teachers to look at to determine, does the resource meet these success criteria? They're not limited to just looking at those. Those are examples. We didn't try to include every single bullet point there could possibly be. The purpose of those bullets are to help them understand what that category is and what they should be evaluating. We're only collecting one score for that entire area from teachers, not an individual list of all of those bullets. So then once we have that information from each one of our teachers, we'll be able to evaluate kind of broadly how each one of our pilot groups used the resource and felt about the resource in those critical areas. Again, we'll evaluate that on a K2 basis and a 3.5 basis, and then as a system. The real the outside chance that we would have different resources would be if we went Super Kids K2, because that's just a K2 program. Otherwise, it'll be evaluating Wonders K5 or HMH K5.
I was reading through the rubric, and it looks like a lot of details gone into this process. I think when we started the piloting process, this was part of the overall game plan that you and Chris had put together in regards to this. But to see it come to life on a page and see how detailed it is and how much information we're taking back from our staff on it is fantastic. So. appreciate the efforts in that end.
And in the development of this is something that was shared with our reading specialists, with our principals, with teachers on the front end, so that if there were any elements of it that they thought should be adjusted or further explained, they were allowed to provide feedback, and then I responded to that feedback in the rubric so that we could make it as user-friendly for our teachers as possible.
So eventually you're gonna come back with obviously all the results. Are we gonna get just kind of like the number, 1, 2, or 3, or there's gonna be feedback as far as the strength?
So if there, so teachers will be able to provide written feedback if they want to for a particular area, so they can share their thoughts in that way. But then, part of it, I can kind of seek feedback from you on what you think would be best, if you want a summary score for that, or if you want each of the individual scores that each one of the teachers provided. I can provide it either way.
I think it'd be nice just to know as far as what the strengths of the program, what they saw was the strengths, what they saw were the weaknesses, and kind of why it got that score versus just a score.
Yeah, I think it's important for that too, because I know you'd mentioned the lower grades are going to impact what the upper grades are, but I would hate to put some restraints on the upper grades because it was only best for the lower grades, and I have every bit of confidence your team is taking that all into consideration. But if we can see these ratings and see what our teachers are saying, kind of unscrubbed, would be fantastic.
Especially because if we're looking at potentially K2 being something different, just because it is that much better than just having the same curriculum throughout.
Tracy?
I agree with you. What you said.
Yeah, I want to make sure you had an opportunity. I know you jump. Yeah, Eric.
I don't see it on the packet provided, but in my notes, I had written down that November 1, you're going to reach out to the community and provide for an opportunity for parent feedback.
Yep. So I still have the parent survey. One of the pieces with extending the pilot, I also wanted to extend that period when we were going to reach out to parents. So the parent survey is going to go out so that we can collect that. The timing was I just pushed everything a little bit further into the future because of the extension of our pilot. So each one of the pilot companies, we didn't actually have enough materials to get us to the end. So we've extended that with each one of our companies. So I just wanted to provide them a little bit of extra time to have that with them and their children.
Okay.
But we still will have, so you'll have multiple layers of feedback in addition to just this. So the pieces that will still come will have pre and post for MAP assessments for grades 1 through 5. For kindergarten, the plan is you'll get a reference point. So because we don't MAP test our kindergartners in the fall, because they're very new to school at that point, you'll be able to look at data from kindergarten pilot classrooms compared to non-pilot classrooms. So that will be the basis of comparison there. But grades 1 through 5, you'll be able to have pre and post data for our pilot classrooms. So we'll have the actual achievement data and growth data for our kids. You'll have the rubric evaluation from our teachers. We did student focus groups where we collected information, so you'll get to hear some of the voices of students in the process. And then the last piece will be the community feedback from parents.
Thank you.
With the state pushing that back, we're still good with our deadline for implementation heading into next school year?
Yeah, I don't see any major challenges in terms of shifting it by a couple of months. The one bigger drawback to it is the number of professional development days that occur afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So right now it looks like we'll be able to have at least one that we could fully dedicate to providing teachers with some information about the resource, so that they have some of that front loaded by the time that they get the resource, and then heading into the summer, they'll have access to those materials and that initial training that goes along with it. So that should lead to them feeling a little bit more prepared to launch it in the fall.
We're not talking about August 30th, here's the materials.
Nope.
Good luck.
Well, it's gonna be a credit to the teachers that they don't end up using their curriculum, that they now have to learn 2 different curriculums within a short period of time, so credit to them.
Mhm.
And we're gonna have to go through that process.
Yeah, and every time I meet with the teachers, I reiterate, you know, this process has been built ground up with them. Their voices have been extremely important to the process, but then on the back end of that, when you think about the work that they have to do within the classroom on a daily basis to use a brand new resource, that's a challenging situation for them to be in, but they're dedicated to making sure that we have the best resources possible in our students' hands.
And you said they're already visiting other classrooms just to.
Yep,
kinda
so
see that
some of
work.
them, some of the times it's been within building, but we've even made the accommodation so that they could leave their building so that they could see Super Kids happening at the same grade level in a different building.
And nothing as far as the state has gone off track. I think we were pretty comfortable with the 3 that we chose tracking to be under this umbrella of recommendation in some form or fashion based off of its foundations in the science of reading.
Correct.
Good. Anything else? We can move on to, if there's nothing else, we can move on to 5B, KMS schedule review.
All right, tonight we have a special guest for the Teaching and Learning Committee. I think this might be my first special guest that I've brought.
It's quite an honor, Jane.
You're welcome, Jess. So Jess and I this year have been working with a team of middle school teachers. It started back in August, I think was our very first
Well, we started in May, actually. We had our first meeting in May.
in May. That's why I brought my special guest. And I'll let Jess kind of explain why we even started thinking about looking at the schedule at Kennedy Middle School.
All right, so my first summer here was July 2022. I did a one-on-one chats where I met individually with every single staff, almost every single staff member at Kennedy Middle School, and asked them what's going well at Kennedy, what could be better, what could be improved, and then what do they want from a principal. What could be improved, one of the big themes that came through with that was the schedule, and that was for 2 reasons. One, there was an unstructured time in the middle of our day called SAS and IDR, which is a study hall and reading, and then the other reason was because our tech ed, social studies, science, all coordinated arts, I should say, were only 40 minutes, and they wanted an extended time. They didn't feel like that was enough. So we decided to look at our whole schedule. In the middle of the day, we have an hour and a half. That includes a half an hour study hall, lunch, and then a half an hour IDR. So we started thinking about how we could take that time, keep an advisory period, which is very common in school districts around this area, keep that 30-minute, but then how else could we better use that extra 30 minutes? So that's what really was the impetus for this whole schedule change.
So this is something that, again, teachers had a lot of voice in saying this is something that we would like to take a look at. And Jess brought me into the process so that we could collaboratively work together to take a look at the KMS schedule. So what I provided for you is kind of a process that Jess and I have gone through with that team. It started very early on in terms of identifying what the values of that team were related to the schedule specifically. So when we talked about what was working really well within that schedule, what did they value within the schedule, and what were some of the challenges of the schedule. And as Jess has mentioned, some of the things that they thought were strengths were around core instruction, and that math, ELA, science, social studies, they see their students every single day, and they saw that as a strength. They saw the importance of making sure that there was a time in the day to build connections with students in the middle school. And they also identified a strength that we had longer math and ELA blocks because for both of those content areas, the amount of standards that are associated with it and the amount of time that it takes to fully immerse kids in those standards, it takes a little bit of extra time. So those longer blocks for math and ELA were strengths that they saw in the schedule. And then as Jess had mentioned from her individual meetings with teachers, the team also acknowledged that IDR and SAS structure wasn't really working, that it was a longer period of time during the day that wasn't as structured as they wanted it to be for middle school kids. And then the other two big drawbacks were the coordinated arts and science and social studies classes, where some of our coordinated arts teachers mentioned, by the time you're running an art class and kids get their supplies and they get to their seat and you still have to allow for them to clean up, there's not a whole lot of time for them within that art class to work on their project. The same thing with gym. A lot of the coordinated arts classes have a little bit of setup and takedown at the end of it, which really doesn't maximize the amount of instructional time that they have. So as we started to look at the priorities and values, we worked through the team to create some themes of what they thought would be important for any kind of schedule that we would try to modify. And one of the big things that they talked about was still making sure that we had choice and opportunities for students to explore different ideas in the coordinated arts. They wanted to make sure that there was still a time within the day that they could build connections with kids. They thought the structure should be appropriate for middle school kids, so thinking about middle school kids as the special types of humans that middle schoolers are, to make sure that there's some movement that's built into the school day for them, that we think about when's the best time for a middle schooler to have one of their core classes, when is it best for them to have an advisory period that they can see a teacher and ask questions about their homework. Would that work the best at the beginning of the day, the middle of the day, the end of the day? So thinking about the schedule in terms of the middle school student. They also said it was very important for them to have common planning time for their teams. So the way that the KMS schedule works right now, the 8th grade math teachers have a designated time within the school day that they can meet, collaborate, talk about the lessons that they're doing with students. And they also wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for academic support, so when students needed help, that there was a time for them to get that. In addition to that, what we did was we started to review the best practices in middle school scheduling. So there is some research out there about what are some of the best practices that you can have in a middle school, and they compared that. They also asked questions about the state requirements and minute allocations for the schedule to make sure that we weren't violating any of the requirements that we have. So when we took a look at those items plus their values plus the big priorities that they have, we started narrowing it down to what some scheduling options would look like. The intent for next steps is we'll bring you some of the final pieces for what they've landed on in a schedule. We're still working through some of the mechanics of what that would look like. I can tell you some of the big pieces that would look different between the KMS schedule that I provided in the packet and kind of where the team is going. The biggest changes that you would see is that middle of the day piece, where kids will no longer have 2 half-an-hour blocks that are allocated for SAS and IDR. It would just be 1 half-an-hour-ish block of time that students would have to meet some of the needs that we accomplished during that SAS time, where they can see an additional teacher for help, where they can work on homework, where they can build connections with a teacher and have a kind of go-to teacher for them when they need help with something. So you'll see that within that schedule. And then the way that time allocation works out is we would take the leftover block from SAS and IDR and allocate that into the other class hours, thus resulting in a little bit of extra time for ELA and math, and then giving each one of our coordinated arts classes more time as well.
If anybody else has something, go ahead. And so when you brought this up initially, the first things were student experience related to me, as far as the IDR lunch SAS. It's those 3 in order. So when I see that as a parent, I can only imagine what the school's dealing with as far as like an academic startup to the day, and then kind of a break from that, and then a restart in the afternoon. So we probably see a little more consistency not to have quite such a long break in the middle. So maybe that start up in the afternoon, the refocus of the children is a little quicker and easier for our staff. Obviously, that this sounds like this came generated initially from staff at the school that's been there, trying to figure out what would work best for everybody involved, them and the students. And then third is, if these coordinated arts sections become a little longer, I know we've had conversations about other programming that we have to offer, and they tend to then go into currently an ELA or math because they're the longer blocks, but then we're losing those instructional times in our core areas, and it might open up the door to push those into some of our softer skill areas if those classes are longer. Is that a possibility, I guess?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. We haven't finalized the time blocks right now, but to give you a frame of reference, one of the common schedules we've looked at has math and ELA around 90 minutes for students. That would be an extension from what they currently have. So it would give us more time in math and would give us more time in ELA. And then for each one of our coordinated arts classes and science and social studies, those would extend to about 45 minutes. From a logistics standpoint, when you have the larger block being twice as long as the shorter block, that just structurally works out better into the schedule. But it also is a benefit for our teachers in terms of prep time. It blocks their prep time together. If you had deviations in how long those classes were, so for example, we changed the distribution to be 80 minutes of those longer blocks and 50 minutes of the coordinated arts, you end up with these little tiny pieces of time to try and fill those gaps, so then teachers have 15 minutes of prep time in between two classes and then a longer period of prep time someplace else. And that generally isn't the most effective way. That way teachers can get in, they can start collaborating with one another, they can stay on that same task that they're working on, and they can have a period of time that's designated for that versus having this 15-minute unstructured time. I don't know if I answered your question or...
Yeah, so I was more referencing, I believe our previous director of pupil services last spring, I want to say, I'd have to look at my notes to see exactly what it was. There's a program we have to bring through via the state. It's mandated. And my initial issue with it was, well, it got put in, it was either math or ELA. And the answer provided to us at that time was, well, because that was the most significant block of time, and it would be harder to fit all of the required material into one of our shorter blocks. So I think this would lend to us having more flexibility with those types of programs,
Yeah, and that's
not interrupting our core studies.
correct. And once we structurally figure out the schedule piece, the next step that the team wants to discuss is what that advisory time looks like, and that might be an ideal time for programs like you're discussing. So, twice.
I think it was suicide prevention.
That's the one that's at the top of my head. I think
Yeah.
there was
Or
others
something else
in
as well.
discussion, but I think that was one
It
that
was
he
taking- it was
formally.
supplanting math time.
Yeah.
And this advisory can be used in that capacity, because if you think about what that yields for teachers, it's going to be it's a smaller group of kids just because of the nature of it. All teachers have an advisory period. It's all running at the same time, unlike other periods of the day where some teachers would have prep and they don't have students with them. During an advisory period of the day, all teachers would have students. So the class sizes during that period of time is a little bit smaller. So if you're dealing with a sensitive topic like suicide prevention, sometimes that works a little bit better when you have a little bit of smaller group of students to work with.
It would mirror advisory from a structure standpoint to what happens then once they get to GHS as well. So understanding what an advisory time can be utilized for, maybe career exploration, those specialized programs, and just having a go-to teacher in a smaller environment as well.
It's also called home base, homeroom. Those are some other ways that we used to call it.
Jess, can you just let the committee and full board, I guess, know who, kind of the makeup of the team and how many people that is?
Yeah, we have about, I'd say about 20 people on the team, and we've got a representative from 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, coordinated arts, counseling, student services, admin, and district office,
Special education.
and special education. And that was by, like, I asked who wanted to be part of it, and it naturally formed like that, so pretty cool. A lot of
President
people wanted to be
Medved.
involved.
Question for you. Do we have any data on length of class, the effectiveness, shorter versus longer? I haven't looked into that in a while. I know at younger ages, longer classes are not good. Do we have data to support what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish? I get the whole program with half classes and full classes.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, so in the research that the team looked at, they kind of gave a window for when, what's the ideal time for an ELA or a math class. And it really is kind of a range of time. Most of them are bordering on longer than an hour would be required for both math and ELA. Some of them going all the way up to 120 minutes. One of the discussions that Jess and I had with the team is it's never going to be just about the amount of time that we allocate to math or ELA or any subject area. I can't just say, here's 120 minutes to do ELA, and then all of a sudden you're going to see our ELA scores rocket up. It's what are the instructional practices that we're using during that block of time, and what are the things that we need to do professionally on the professional development side to build up capacity to think about, if we do have a 90-minute block, which is slightly longer than we have right now, what might that look like? And we have a teacher who's on the team who talks about some of the math practices that she uses in her classroom, where she's got kids up and she's got them at the boards, and then she brings them back down for a discussion. So it's how do you utilize the time that you have, because you can use 40 minutes and do some amazing things in that, which a lot of our coordinated arts teachers are already doing. And then if we give them 120 minutes, you can't just replicate that 3 times and then say that's how I'm going to use my block. So you'll see, you can find research that says, well, just shifting to a block schedule doesn't necessarily increase student performance. It's never going to be about just the amount of time that we allocate. It's about how we use the minutes within those blocks. So 90 minutes it's still pretty much in the sweet spot of the research would say that's about what's appropriate. Our math teacher, one of the math teachers who's on the team said, it's very tight right now, and she's thinking about that 80-minute time period that she has for math, that she really has to go to get it all done, and that there are still times where they're not accomplishing everything she hopes to accomplish during that block time. So 90 minutes she thought would be an amazing thing. We had an art teacher who was on the team, and there was kind of this debate about, is 5 minutes really, is that really a big deal that we're giving this? And her response was, 5 minutes would mean the world to me because of all the different things that we could then accomplish with that 5 extra minutes during that time period. So I think some of those small shifts could go a long way for what our staff's looking for.
Yeah, I think the big concern for me was the focus issue. We can keep kids focused for that amount of time, but it's not necessarily what they're capable of, it's what we're capable of pulling from them. Are we able to keep them engaged and keep them active and keep them up and down and moving around?
Yep.
and-
That was exactly what I was gonna say. You're talking about engagement strategies. We've
Yeah.
got physical engagement, movement, emotional engagement, social engagement, intellectual engagement.
Right.
So those are some of the professional development opportunities that we can have. Not just give them 90 minutes and say go, but here's how to best use 90 minutes to keep a middle schooler engaged.
Right. If you can keep them moving and engaged,
Yep.
and 90 minutes will go quick.
That's true.
They'll be like, oh, we're done already?
I've taught in a 90-minute class, and it goes really fast when you've got things moving, and the students are leading it, and they're moving from one thing to another. It's a really cool experience.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. I think this is another example of the entire team pulling in a direction from the ground up. So I think it's exciting to see that. I think we've heard some narratives that doesn't necessarily happen, and I think it's just another way we're dispelling some of those narratives. So I appreciate the hard work that's going into all these different categories. So thank you. Item 6, unfinished business, we have none. Item 7, new business, we have none. Item 8, I will take a motion.
Move to adjourn.
I will second.
Mr. Pollock with the motion, Mr. Higginbotham with the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? We are adjourned at 5:34 PM.